Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Infrastructure Network. My name is Chad Smeltzer. I'm your host. Today, I'm excited to introduce Andrew Watkins and Chris Foreman, who are the founders of Marketplace.city. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Great to be
Hi,
here, Chad.
thanks for
Thanks.
having us.
So, Marketplace.city, you guys have been around for 5, 6 years now, I believe, 4 years. Um,
Yeah, 5 years.
how did you guys get the business started? How did you guys meet? Andrew, you want to go first? I know it gets
Sure.
confusing with who's going to go first.
Yeah, no,
Andrew.
it's fine. Yeah, like I said, thanks for having us. Yeah, we launched actually back in 2017, so a little over 5 years at this point, the fall of 2017, with really the concept behind like how with all of these with all the data out there and all of the sort of government data, especially focused on sort of the technology area. That's where we started. Why isn't it easier to find and understand and ultimately buy technology products and services and other things that are out there for governments? And so we actually launched the product off the back of a beta with New York City. It was Marketplace.nyc, then became Marketplace.city with that sort of sourcing aspect in mind. Of that came from not just New York, but actually a conversation with multiple CTOs, CIOs, innovation directors on all of these companies are coming at us because of our titles and our roles, but really their technology is for folks across the city. And as the three of us know, right? Cities are not like a single department. They're not a single organism. They're a series of departments and whatever. And they people would come and send them the same phone call and email and all that stuff of, I have great analytics, I have sensors, I do all this stuff, but they didn't have a good way of categorizing like, are you right for public works? Are you talking about health and human services? Are you
Right.
even legitimate, or are you just one guy with an idea who hasn't even built the app yet? Right.
Right.
And so the original sort of concept behind the beta was categorizing, sort of all of that information into, a taxonomy, categories, those sorts of things to
Yeah.
make it easier for the governments to understand what's out there for what I need, who are they working with, and sort of, how are those things performing? So that's a sort
Yeah.
of base concept, and I'll let Chris talk a little bit more than how we formed the company and went from there.
Yeah, well, it was actually pre NYC. So, I mean, we're quite fortunate that our sort of first beta customer was, one of the largest cities in the
Right.
world.
That's, that's
But it
awesome.
actually started in a different large city back in Chicago. There was a lab in the city called UI Labs. And then inside of that was a smart city lab called City Digital. And we met in that lab where I was sort of transitioning out of a software company and was, supporting a project for smart cities and around like flood management, flood mitigation within the city of Chicago. And we were piloting these like new innovative technology solutions and really, found out that, really proved out that, cities have a real difficult time not only sourcing new innovative technology, but then proving that it's going to work inside of their city and then gaining support citywide to fund it, deploy it, and actually manage it at a large scale. And what really helps in these scenarios is having references of what other cities have done, other governments, what companies are out there, what type of credentials do they have, who their customers are, how they price, and things like that. And so we sort of put our heads together around this concept of this centralized platform that's aggregating all of this content. And Andrew and I decided we were going to launch the company together, originally based on that experience in Chicago. And then as it turned out, Andrew's college roommate was an engineer and had built the original beta in New York City. And so Andrew and I were two non-engineers that were sort of searching for a way to develop a product. And Andrew had a connection to an actual engineer who had started a product out in New York, and we're looking for someone to like go and commercialize it. And so
Yeah.
we all sort of put all that together, and sort of magic happened, back in 20 early 2017.
Yep.
And that led to us deciding like, hey, we're going to actually like jump in and do this. And it was having the support of folks like New York City and their network to convince us to go and move forward with it. Then ended up sort of launching the product, launching the company, launching the product in summer and fall of 2017. and then growing up from there and learning a ton, and
Right.
even pivoting a couple times along the way. But yeah.
I'm learning those pain points right now, as you guys are at the same time.
Always learning.
Always learning, right? Yeah, no. So that's a great, very interesting way that you guys just kind of started a government software solution, right? It's really what you guys came. So you guys had no background in like public sector prior to that, or had you did, Andrew?
Yeah. You all, Chris,
Chris
you should tell your background.
I
was wondering how you guys built and sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there, but I was thinking about how did you guys not have experience in public sector and then just start a software company? It's like someone had to have some kind of experience.
Yeah. Well, we haven't officially worked in the public sector, worked for the government per se,
Okay,
but
got it.
I've been basically supporting government customers for my entire career in the technology space. So I worked either short time in professional services, and then the majority of my career in software. And the government was my primary customer. And for the company that I worked for prior to starting Marketplace, I had launched the public sector business unit, created a wholly owned subsidiary that sold to really everything from the federal government to the Defense Department, and then also state and local government. And I think I really enjoyed working at the federal level and with the DoD, especially at during wartime, but really felt my closest affinity working with cities and counties. You're sort of closest to the problems, as I say, like in especially domestic issues, and that where you can have, I think, the largest amount of impact on quality of life if you're working at that real kind of very localized level. Whereas working at a federal level or a state level, you're doing like very large programs that are supportive, and things do trickle down. But if you're working with the cities and counties, you're really sort of closest to the issues at hand. So I sort of had that affinity and wanted to work more with state and local.
Got it. Yeah, no. So that makes total sense why you guys are very passionate about this company, because you got to see it from a sales perspective, it sounds like, and then Andrew kind of is learning all these pain points that are coming out from these cities. Am I correct on that?
Yeah,
I've talked to Andrew. I know he gets fired up.
Like the lab Chris mentioned, right? City Digital, amongst other names that it had. Like I had helped launch that as a public-private partnership between companies and universities and government, right? Okay. And so, while not explicitly, again, sort of the same thing, working with the government, and prior to that had been a management consultant, and I hadn't really worked on a lot of sort of government problems, but like problem solving and growing businesses. And I think sort of the same thing from a outside of business, right? Like sort of believe pretty strongly in cities and local politics, and or not local civics, I guess. Right. Not necessarily politics being the right word. Right. Like like cities and communities like do play a real role in our life, and like the government is sort of one aspect of that. And honestly, when we launching City Digital and sort of seeing that problem of the cities have these problems, there's all these companies who want to solve them. Sometimes they do get to solve them, and then it's really hard to go repeat that, and sometimes they give up. Sometimes they just pivot to working on enterprise or utilities or things that are a little bit, easier, a lower hurdle. Not always, but sometimes. It's all of us who ultimately lose out on that. And so like it was a sort of a big meaty problem, and so we thought we had a good opportunity to solve it, and both of us were sort of passionate about that, about making sure it did get solved.
Yeah, because you look at the procurement system and the way things are kind of go internally within public sector. There's a lot of people, a lot of sometimes decision makers, because everyone wants to give their 2 cents on what they want for a product or service, that kind of thing creates a lot of struggles for technology to get into these cities, just because of those barrier to entry of just the internal processes within public sector. So then you guys are basically streamlining that solution by bringing are the technologies that you're putting on your platform, are they validated? You vet them? Like how do you qualify them, I guess?
Yeah. So I think that one thing to mention is that we are addressing this huge issue, right? A huge sort of challenge within the public sector, because the public sector buys just in the U.S. local government alone buys trillions of dollars of goods and services on an annual basis, and in the technology space, there are well over $100 billion in spend on an annual basis, and so we decided to look at the technology space initially because it definitely relates well to our backgrounds, but also this is an area that is changing very rapidly. It's an area there is not a lot of institutional knowledge within local government today on technology, especially new innovative technology. And we don't we do look at sort of larger enterprise technologies that you might find also in the private sector. But I think where we really specialize is the products that are actually designed for city government or for county government, which you often will find in the public safety department, the public works department, maybe a county level, jails and courts and parks and recreation, things that you don't necessarily find outside of the public sector, and there aren't a long list of customers or references that you can really call on. And so when we look at these technology solutions, we are sort of helping to build intelligence for the government user, and then we're inviting these vendors and these suppliers to come and publish their content and publish their products into Marketplace.city. Now, we don't go through the technical validation of those products when they're published. A lot of that is still sort of reliant on either the end user themselves or consultants or their own, their IT departments and what have you that are doing that validation. We're not going and testing these products ourselves. What we're doing is really trying to help the local governments just better understand this marketplace. Today they are primarily using online search portals to find and who's out there and who does this and who are the references. And this is just a much better way of going and conducting your research and then validating a market as to how much you should be budgeting. Who are the potential players? Like, how do you scale the vendor set versus the customer set? And some vendors really support larger government customers. Some of them support much smaller government customers. And just knowing that you're kind of aiming at the right place, and then really just helping to categorize that, visualize it for that government end user. And so that's a big function of the marketplace is really pulling in, like our directory is pulling that data in and creating these vehicles that can continually pull data in and assess it, analyze it, and then put it back out through intelligence to the government users.
Yeah, I think the sort of key thing there is, right, like people, even if they don't know exactly all the things that solve their problems, actually do understand their pain points and problems.
Right.
They can't always articulate them perfectly, but they do understand them, right? You're the expert on those things. And so we, aren't ever wearing police body cameras, right? Chris and I are in an office and out with customers. Like, we're not going to be able to understand, like, does this solve the pain point? Is this, redaction software actually capturing people's, redacting license plates and faces and all of that? But what they don't know is who's doing it and how is it working and those sort of things. And so when we organize it, they generally have the same sets of questions, like I said earlier, right? Of who's on the market, what are their case studies, some key functionalities based on that vertical, pricing model, how can I buy it? If we can show them all of that and help them apply those filters so that they understand, and I'll use body cameras again because it's a
right.
It's a knowable market, right? There aren't unlimited number of people that provide that. If you're a city of 300,000, there's a set of customers that can support you, right? They have to have a big enough infrastructure. They have to have a powerful enough, sort of tested back end. Like, you can't be the guinea pig for, two guys in a garage. As like, they have to build their way up to you, right? Like, as a customer set. And so when you show them who all of those are and they can filter down to, I see who they are, I understand, and then I either need to go get specific information from them about how they're going to integrate to my system, or just meet with them to sort of understand what that is. You've really moved them, a huge way forward into it, towards that purchase. And because they now are very comfortable and they've lowered the risk of, I now do know the market, so I can correctly articulate what I want and need. And I found a lot of times multiple people who I think can solve that need.
Yeah. You're 100% on that. That's what a lot of government people need. They need a resource to go to grab information about potential products, technology solutions, that they can buy into that may have already kind of gone through a process working with other cities, for example, understanding where they've worked with those other cities and what that relationship looked like. Did the product work correctly? Did it meet the needs of the cities? And then obviously take that to the next cities. And I'm 100% a believer in that type of solution, because otherwise, what else are you doing? Googling? You
You're
just
Googling,
Googling?
yeah, you're going
Talking to your
to,
Right.
neighbors, right?
yeah,
Like it's not that those things that you can't find good information through that. Like, of course you can. Like, references and validations is part of what we're pulling together, but like your neighbor might not know,
Right.
right? Like, in fact, the better set might not be your immediate, suburban neighbor, but a peer city 400 miles away, and you may not know those people,
Right.
right? And so you need to sort of see that information, because that's, even if we take out big cities like Chicago and New York, right? Aurora, Illinois' peer is probably more likely Grand Rapids, Michigan, or, Champaign, Illinois, or Des Moines, Iowa, than it is Wheaton,
Right.
because of the structure of the city. Suburban, like less commercial space, like all those things.
Yeah.
It's a very different setup. Yeah.
Yeah. Chris, did you want to add into that before I
yeah.
think
Just
another question?
when folks are going to look for references, they have a lot of industry groups. That the government has no shortage of associations and conferences, for basically every role and title within local government. So if you're public works, they have your own group. If you're planners, you have your own group. If you're police or chiefs or mayors, city managers, assistant city managers, you have your own industry group. And they all hold their own meetings and conferences, and they provide opportunities for vendors to exhibit or to sponsor and speak and things like that. And oftentimes they're sort of defaulting back to the fellow members of those groups, asking for references, or they're defaulting back to the people that sponsor and exhibit at their shows. And so it's like, that's not a great way to assess the overall market. I mean, it's fantastic that these companies are getting some kind of return on their investment of exhibiting or sponsoring conferences.
Yeah.
And I think the members, they want to sort of reciprocate the investments that the vendors are making. But to just assume that because somebody's paying to exhibit at a show, or just because somebody's paying to sponsor, that they're the best ones in the market is just kind of irresponsible, So it's a good way to get the information, but just kind of hunting and pecking through an exhibit show, floor, or walking the floor and talking to vendors is not a great way to do research. It's a great way to get free drinks, but it's not a great way to actually actually decide who you're going to be a long-term, partnership with.
Oh man, you are on it, Chris. 100%, man. That was my life for a decade at least. These trade shows, brutal. I mean, you literally would stand there and look.
How many phone chargers do you have, though? How many phone chargers?
The whole thing was ridiculous. Look, I'm all about trade shows, and I get it, advertising and things like that, and everybody kind of conveying. I made more business at the bars and restaurants, like you said, Chris, than at the trade show floor, standing there for 9 hours, 10 hours, whatever it was. It was ridiculous. Right. And all that time you spend away from your family and stuff, it's kind of crazy. I would do 1 or 2 trade shows a week, just kind of give you perspective here when you're trying to sell service. It's crazy, like you guys know. But so you kind of threw me off there when you went with that. I was like, wow, we went trade shows now. That's actually a good point. Yeah, you're right, because if they have the money to spend all that on that trade show floor, and sponsor, it doesn't mean that you're like you should do business with them 100%. Here's my thing where I was going to go through with the next question is not only that, just connecting and references and stuff like that, and validating whether it's a good technology or not, but also understanding whether this, I guess, how would I describe this? The technology has good data. Does it actually give you what I'm learning is like there's a ton of technology taking advantage of some cities because it just doesn't have the right way of producing data, or it's being massaged by humans and they're presenting it as AI or machine learning and stuff like that. And I'm like, wait, but there's people that are actually massaging the data, they're fixing and correcting the data, and I get some of that, but they're selling it certain ways. What do you think about that this AI machine learning kind of data that's coming into these cities? How's that going to be managed? I don't know if that's the best question, but
Yeah, well, I'd say that I do sort of subscribe to the methodology they say about like social media, that like if you're not the customer, then you're the product. Like if you're not paying for this solution, if you're getting it for free, then you're it's your data they're probably mining and selling, somewhere else.
right.
So I think like people are oftentimes going into social media somewhat naive, but also often just knowing like, hey, yeah, my data is being like taken and sold, even, sold, things are being sold back to me because of my data, or they're being sold to somebody else.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's like this, maybe I am maybe naive, but like I think that most of the companies that we see in the public sector that are creating technology are doing it for the right reasons. Like they're doing it to to actually support the goal of the various government departments there. I don't think there are I have not seen a lot of companies that are putting out a product that they're selling to the government so they can mine data to go sell that to somebody else, a foreign
Yeah.
country, or sell to the large corporations or what have you. So that may be an unintended sort of byproduct of what they're doing, or that that's it's something that you might think, well, if you're collecting this data, that somebody else can get their hands on it and then do something bad with it, or do something that sort of targets me in a way that invades my privacy.
Right.
What we see are that like most of the companies, that if they're going through the effort of actually developing this technology and trying to go out and sell it to local governments, that they have to be pretty mission driven to be able to actually get to that point. There's a lot easier ways to go and mine people's activity and data
Right.
than actually trying to route through a government procurement process. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it inherently weeds out people who are not fully committed to the mission. So
Got it. Got it.
I
Yeah.
do think the hard piece with some of it is, right. Every government has set themselves up slightly differently, so it's very easy to go in and say, yes, we do vendor management and contract management, and you do something called that, and you feed them back data that does that. But if it then doesn't map into their process and those sort of things, it may not be valuable to them, right?
Right.
And so I do think there's a lot of times there are people trying to make changes or fix stuff or to try to be like, all right, well, the system is not doing exactly what you're doing, so I'm going to try to find a way to build a new API for you, or those sort of things that may not create the best user experience, but I think generally is still people trying to provide customer service in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. Like I am sort of fascinated with where certain markets are going to go in the public sector. Like you just look at visual sensors, optical sensors, or cameras in general. They are just everywhere in our in real life right now, right? So
Right.
they're being they're strapped to our police officers, right? They're in every building entry that we're going in and out of. They are on surrounding the buildings. They're on light poles. They're on street poles. They are used for various purposes, and as I mentioned, intended or unintended. And there's just this explosion of cameras and sensors that are out there. So the ability to either monitor, manage, store, redact, archive, delete, it's just, to me, that's just a huge market that's still evolving and needs additional sort of I'd say support in players. I think also the cybersecurity space is incredibly fascinating as well. That there's again so many endpoints and networks and methods of intrusion and phishing, and it's just such a big market that there are so many players that are sort of hitting like these smallest like niche little application or use case or endpoint. And will there be some kind of like consolidation or centralized, management as a service that really pervades, because the governments are continually looking at adding these new services or these new products,
Right.
but increasingly having a difficult time managing them and finding the resources and competing for staff to be able to carry the load and manage all of these these technologies that are coming in. So
Yeah.
I think there's very sort of interesting changes to the market that are coming, especially with a lot of these new technologies.
It's funny you say that, because I interviewed these different public works operators, and the thing they say is technology is great, but it's complex things as well, basically, is what it comes out to.
Mm-hmm.
Is now it made their job more complex. And I thought to myself, wait, the technology made it more complex, which tells me that they're just not being trained on how to actually use the technologies, and making it their job worse. So what happens in that case, right? They're going to say, oh, but this doesn't work. This is a terrible app, this system, whatever. And
Right.
it's going to end up being a waste of maybe taxpayer dollars, because if the guys aren't invested, they're just not going to use it. And then that becomes a big issue for some of the cities and what they're spending technology on anyway. But yes, I can see where you're exactly right. It's once you buy it, who's going to manage it? That's one of those things that every city has to deal with. What are some of your challenges, just as you've gotten the software up, you got your technology, you got customers now? What are some of your challenges with Marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think to start, right, like a couple of them are things are true sort of generally industry wide, right? Like the government, somewhat by design, doesn't move rapidly, right? And so
Right.
the speed of scaling isn't always as fast as certainly entrepreneurs want it to be, or sometimes I think people expect based on consumer markets, or even residents expect sometimes based on how their life works in other aspects in non-government interaction. So
Right.
that's always one. I mean, I think the other piece is, right, like sort of what you just talked about, right? Like change involves training and time and is hard and all of those things. And it's one of those points of like, we have to convince people that like, hey, using this data at this point in the process is different maybe than what you're doing today, because it isn't what you did 10 or 20 years ago, but is something that we that you need to do in order to be more effective.
Yeah, you're right. I was just making sure there wasn't an echo, by the way. I was just
I heard of one too, but
I
I
heard
just
one.
decided
I
to
saw
power
Chris
through it.
mute, and I was like, okay, maybe I should mute. But
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. No, I think it's some of the challenges, especially just not just specific to us, but to any entrepreneur or founder, is like just maintaining focus. I think just there are so many distractions, or so many like shiny objects that you can chase as a founder, that say, oh, that's this is an interesting product area, or I have the ability to pivot in this direction, that direction, or I want to pursue this partnership, or I want to go after this customer, and you could end up spending an enormous amount of your time and effort, and not get a huge return on that. But I think that if you spend a lot of time on sort of deciding what your focus is going to be, decide what your product is, like where you are in this market, because I think like we sort of talked, you mentioned like early in the discussion here that like we both work in the procurement space, or like folks work in in contracting, but there are a lot of different niches and different sort of narrower value that can be created, and knowing like what it is that you do and do well, and staying focused on that, and not trying to do being all things to all people. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is like, hey, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, what do you need? Because I'll provide that to you. I'll go get it. If I don't have it, I'll get it delivered to you. And being like a marketplace company where we sort of serve two ends of this space alone, makes it challenging just from the start. We have two different potential customer bases, and it can create some distractions and burn a lot of cycles that you would rather you're not selling your actual product. So I think focus is one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, and I'm learning that as just you guys are ahead of me, but yes, all that is 100% on point, man. Especially in this space, because infrastructure, for example, or technologies, like you kind of described, these different parts of government. Government buys everything, right? So everything, there's a vertical for everything you
Right.
product and service you have out there. So it can get, like you said, shiny objects. You're like, oh, you can do that, you can do that. So I can see where that happens. So how do you think? Because we're running out of time here. How do you think we could improve procurement? Just in general. Love to just understand your perception of it, and then we'll have to end the podcast after that.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. And I think the biggest piece is, right, like in like a lot of spaces, right, like is just taking a look at, is the way I'm doing it achieving the outcome I want or need, right? Like there's nothing, certainly the processes and policies and whatever were put in place for good reasons, right? People in these jobs weren't going to work purposefully, like trying to make, it hard or those sort of things. Some of it was put in place to explicitly stop corruption of a certain era of taxpayer dollars. Like that's generally a good thing. But
Right.
where can we look at, okay, is there a way to achieve our goals of fairness and transparency and all of those things, but also more effectively, use resources, the hours, internal resources and even external spend on something has a cost, right? Like that's a real thing that, 99% of businesses would definitely count and track those things. Is if I spend a lot of hours on something, it costs something. And so I think the biggest piece is just understanding, for governments where those pain points are and are we achieving our outcomes? And if we're not, what things are stopping them? I think the two places that I always say, to look at that is, one is like what conversations and what market, interaction back and forth between, vendors and government is happening and is allowed, right? Some places have gotten so worried about someone's going to protest or someone's going to say we did something wrong. They put up these walls that then becomes, as I describe it, like they lob over a request, you try to interpret it, and then you lob something back, right? Yeah. And sometimes that works, but it really doesn't, and no one will say it's efficient, right? And so I think that's the sort of first one. If you actually look at, again, if there's a way you can transparently talk to people, you can share that information, you can do those things. I think sort of that's the one. And then I think the second one is just thinking about, what do we make, what data and what choices are we really making a decision on? And let's try to go understand and find those points, right? I think sometimes people overcomplicate what they're looking for. They're really always looking for an outcome, but people get in the habit of, because I threw it over the wall so many times, I need to write down exactly what I want so that people know exactly what to build for me.
Right.
When that assumes you have a very high degree of expertise in what you're writing. And not for, fault of trying, but everyone can't be an expert in everything. Like that is a truth, right? And so I think it is thinking more about, well, these really are, this smaller list of thing is really the things I want done. And as long as it falls within these parameters, I don't necessarily care how it's accomplished. Certainly I care about the cost and about other things and, local and other things that go in and that are fine. But I think those are the two things that thinking about, like, what parts of the process are stopping me from getting the information I want, and then what parts, can I simplify because we have new tools. We have access to things like we can more easily find and work with a vendor 3,000 miles away that we couldn't 40 years ago.
Right. Good points. Very good points, Andrew. Chris?
Yeah. I forgot the original question.
Just about procurement, improving procurement. Yeah.
No, I really, I look back at like a lot of our customers are early innovators. And I'd say like, that there's a common thread of people who are sort of contrarians and willing to challenge the status quo. And those people were originally very difficult to find in the public sector, are less rare now. You're more commonly seeing people who are coming from the private sector into the public sector, or looking at the public sector as less of like this kind of long-term career and more of just like, kind of doing your civil service and, bringing in values from, the private sector as far as expediency and urgency, and bring that into a public sector realm is really exciting. I think that's where we can have some of the biggest impact, is just getting more folks that have this a mindset of asking, like, why is something a certain way? Like, why are we doing it the way we've always been doing it? And does that work best? And I think having more disruptors and more innovators and more new entrants into the public sector will probably have the greatest long-term impact, because literally everything is ripe for disruption in the public sector. So it's just great to have more people that can do that, that are willing to do that.
Yeah, you're spot on, Chris. Andrew, do you want to add one more thing? Or
nope, that's it.
Okay, just checking.
No.
I saw you like maybe you wanted to say something.
Nope, just fidgeting.
Hey,
nope,
you guys are making a huge difference. You're a disruptor in the industry, like you just said, and we're kind of all on the same path of disrupting this market, because it's a slow process. It's very archaic. It's very fragmented, and there is a ton of room for improvement in government sector in general. So kudos to you guys for starting Marketplace.city and bringing a needed technology to these local governments. So thanks a lot. And how, Andrew and Chris, how can they get a hold of you, the audience, and what's the best way to reach out?
Yeah, I mean, our website is our name, so you can just go to Marketplace.city. That makes it easier, but also we keep it pretty simple. If you want either of us, it's Andrew at Marketplace.city or Chris at Marketplace.city, and you can find us.
Done deal. This is it.
Yeah.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Chad.
Have a great
Thanks
day.
for having us.